just say something to us so we know that you're listening. And
okay, we're going live now. This is it.
What's happening out there? Colored Commentary. Good to be here with you. This is Colored Commentary, colorful conversations by colorful people about Christianity, culture, and race. And I'm excited to have some folks in here.
Yo, what's up? Yeah, I mean, I'm excited too because
I'm getting my volume all worked out in here.
I like these lives. I like the idea of connecting with you guys, interacting with y'all. So I'm hoping that these get real lively in the chat.
Look, it's always lively, right? And if this is your first time to Color Commentary, as I said, it's colorful conversations by colorful people about Christianity, culture, and race. And I'm your host, Marcus Lloyd, and Antoine, you are in here gonna be making sure we got all the stuff together and giving us some good conversation around a very difficult topic today.
Yes. And I know there's probably people like, okay, so you guys are normally talking about race stuff. It's Christianity, race, and culture. So a lot of times, we will talk about more than just race things. We'll talk about how we as Christians can think about a lot of things. Although this topic kind of bleeds into some racial elements, potentially.
As we talk about it, and as we have been even prepping for some of this and the conversations we've been having with our own threaded group and threaded staff and whatnot, we see that there are some racial components in this. And for those of you, again, who are still new or whatever, this is an organization. There's an organization called Threaded that is powering our podcast, Colored Commentary. And so Threaded is committed to inspiring relationships, reconciliation, and collaborative action amongst the diverse body of Christ. And so we, as an organization, we have a very multi-ethnic, multi-denominational, multi-generational team that gets together to talk about a lot of different things. And so this conversation of vaccines came up. And so we were like, man, let's get on the show, because it does have, like you said, it has that cultural piece, but it also has some racial stuff that we found out about and knew and brought to the meeting as well. So it's going to be an interesting convo.
And it's pieces of the racial stuff that kind of, in my opinion, and we'll get there. Maybe we'll see how the conversation goes, but bleeds into how the vaccine conversation is being had, So anyway, we may get into that if we get into that. But before we get fully in, those of you who are here, do us two quick favors. Number one, make sure you subscribe to the Color Commentary YouTube channel and hit the bell notification so you know when we go live. We're going to do these once a month, and we want to grow the community. We want to grow this chat and get this community talking. And the second thing I love for you to do is to share the link right now. Just go and hit share. Share it to someone who you think would be interested in this conversation about vaccines. And I think we call it vaccines, mandates, and Jesus. So if you are interested or know folks who are interested, or you've just had a conversation recently like we did with someone, then this is a safe place for us to bat around ideas and talk together. So grab your lunch, share the stream, subscribe, and let's get in.
That's right. I love when we can do this, particularly around the lunchtime. I know that, people aren't in the office as they have been before, but some are, and maybe they get their kind of, lunch breaks that they get to take, and to be able to do some of these live shows where we get people while they're munching on whatever they're munching on, that they can kind of jump in. We can get some of their conversation going. It's really helpful.
We need a lunchtime sponsorship is what we need.
We do need, if we had a lunchtime sponsor, like what would be like a lunchtime sponsor for Colored Commentary?
The trope would be Chick-fil-A, but Chick-fil-A doesn't need any sponsorships. People going to Chick-fil-A anyway. They don't care. They don't have to pay for any advertising. You notice you ain't seen this cow around. No. They don't even pay for marketing. They fired their marketing team because they're like, we good. People gonna come to us regardless. So probably won't be Chick-fil-A. Who's struggling? Me and my wife have this running joke that Arby's and Long John Silver's, we don't know why they're in business. Like, Arby's and Long John Silver's in business. I don't even know.
Here's what I would say is, occasionally, and it's occasionally, like
You'll get
I get a hankering. If
you get a little something for Arby's.
I get a little something for Arby's, right?
Do you regret it though every time?
Every single time. Because I'm not, look, part of it is I'm not getting the new stuff, right? I know they're trying to like get like this whole new part of Arby, but what I'm craving is literally the little roast beef sandwich. And it's really little now. Like, and as I'm getting older, I'm like,
yeah,
it's like so little. The little roast beef sandwich with the Arby sauce, that's all I'm craving. And immediately, like when I bite in, I immediately regret my decision.
Like, I don't know why
I have to finish it. It's just so nostalgic.
My first job ever was Arby's.
Really?
And
I didn't know that.
Man, my first job ever.
Oh, wow.
And the Arby melt back in the day was the thing.
Ugh.
I loved the Arby melt. I would still get an Arby melt if I went. I don't want all the other stuff. But anyway, no one else does either. Because if you want fast food, you can show up at Arby's or Long John Silver's and you will be the first in line because no one is there. And you're going to get your food quickly.
Do you even know? I don't even know where a Long John Silver's is currently. Like I
know there's one in Plano.
Is there?
And there's one on 380. There's one on 380 and 75.
Really?
Next to the Arby's.
Oh, that's right. It's become one of those signs that I just don't even see anymore. That's not my Arby's. There's an Arby's a little bit closer to me that I go to when I have my hankering because that's a drive. By the time I drive to that one you mentioned, I would have talked myself out of it. I need a real quick.
I know there's an Arby's around the corner.
Yeah, right where we are. That's right. I keep forgetting that you live like right around the corner now. Like
I do now.
Like all my spots are your spots. You know what I mean? Like,
they're becoming my spots.
You have to go to them. Like you're not going to drive back to your old spots. Like if you want Popeyes, you're not driving to the one that you used to drive.
No.
You got this one up here.
No, but there is a hibachi spot that I used to go to that I kind of miss.
We go to that one. I know that. That's the same one we go.
I'll still go. But yeah. So last thing on this is people. I've had some friends who are like, man, I just can't trust fish, fast food fish, and they make a valid point.
Are you really transitioning with?
Well, I'm transitioning because you might need to be vaccinated in order to eat Long John Silver's. So if you want LJS. You might have to get vaxxed.
Hey, look, I'm not gonna lie to you.
Enjoy the sweet nectar of.
Yes. We're gonna
get
be
talking crumbs from there. That was good.
I don't know if I really ate there enough to have any good nostalgia about it. I just remember it was close to where I lived, and we stopped maybe once or twice. And I think my dad was like, "This is not happening." But I think about vaccines. We are talking about vaccines, and it's kind of tongue in cheek about getting vaccines to go to Long John Silver. But I remember. This does not even have anything to do with coronavirus, right? We're talking about just vaccines. When I went to Rwanda for the first time, I had to get 4 shots, and like over a period of months and those kinds of things. And I remember feeling almost, and it was just sort of like a placebo feeling, but I felt like invincible. I was like, man, I've got so many things in me right now. Like I could
like a super soldier walking around.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I thought it was going to keep me from gaining weight. That's how good, nice it was. I was like, I can eat cholesterol. It's going to be fantastic. Nothing's hurting this body right hilarious. Now. So that's what made me feel like when you were like, let's get a vaccine to go to Long John Silver, right? Well, look, and we are tongue in cheek about the vaccine, but what we're, the conversation we're in about the vaccine is no tongue in cheek, right? Like
no, people are serious about this thing.
A lot of stuff. It's a lot. It's being talked about in so many different ways. Like I went ahead and I was looking at my news app, and I pulled up I was like, let me just search vaccines and see what stories are out there, right? And just obviously the pages. So you've got average age of Californians dying of COVID-19 getting younger. The fully vaccinated is suddenly a much less useful phrase. That's the Atlantic. NBC News, vigilante treatments, anti-vax groups push people to leave ICUs. CNN, boosters doses just got approved in the U.S. At least 15 countries haven't vaccinated 3% of their people yet. Let me move around just a little bit, see if I can get them all in here, because I know I saw some on the Fox space as well. Although I will say that when I went over to Fox to kind of look and see what was going on, I didn't see a lot of articles about vaccines or even COVID at all. Here's one: Washington Post: pregnancy and coronavirus vaccines, your questions answered. Right. So there's just a.
Are you working for one of those apps that kind of aggregates from
it
everywhere?
Aggregates all the stuff, so you can
so
get
it, like, it doesn't. It's not like one side or the other. Or whatever.
No. Like you've got the Seattle Times, you got the Hill, you got the Post, you got the Boston. Usually have a Fox News in here, NBC, San Francisco.
Yeah. Okay,
like
cool.
Everything. So yeah. So I like doing news like that too. I like to be able to, and honestly, I go back and forth just for. I think some would call extremes. I go like, okay, what's CNN talking about over here? And then going, okay, what's Fox talking about over here? I feel like in those sense, you may get some of the extremes of the deal, but trying to get in a couple of different conversations, just so as we come to the day, come to the table here for these conversations, we feel a bit more balanced in that approach, right? I mean, have you been keeping up with any other stuff as far as the vaccines and coronavirus is going
on? Not with a lot of news reports. I'm having a lot of conversations increasingly about it. And I'm just finding that the conversation about vaccines, this is the way it tends to be. Isn't about vaccines at all most of the time for me. For the conversation I'm in, it turns out that we're talking more about government and the use of government, and so it's not about sick people. It's just about governance. And it's weird because this is the same thing when we think about like the Civil War and the way people talked about the Civil War. They're like, hey, it wasn't about slavery. It was about whether the government could tell us whether we could have slaves or not, And so it's the same kind of thing, The conversation went from whatever the actual thing is that's being worked on to whether the government is allowed to do that or not, or can they control our lives, quote unquote, in that way. And so I think it's interesting that recurring fear shows up over time, this fear of the government controlling our lives, and it usurps the actual subject at hand. It's not slavery, it's government control. It's not vaccines, it's government control. And that's what many people are really, really, really having a conversation about. And they were willing to keep slavery in the name of sticking it to the
not
government.
Being able to control it.
And able to stick it to the, or in this case, they're willing to get sick themselves or be a carrier of sickness to others in the name of sticking it to the government. And I think that's a fascinating psychological cycle.
Well, and it's not uncommon, right? I think, there's lots of conversation around the vaccine. We'll talk about it in this sort of sense right now. It's not uncommon, I think, for, particularly Americans to make those kind of choices. There's, the very essence of the beginnings of America were people who were like, I don't want the government to tell me anything. And so they move over to this piece of land to try to create a government where, I guess they can not be told what to do. And then obviously, once these folks, Britain still had the control, they didn't want the British to have the taxation and all the good stuff. And so they started a revolution, right? They rebelled against the government to create ultimately the American government, or the first version of the American government. And then, of course, you mentioned the Civil War, which again was government, saying, hey, let's not enslave human beings. And there was a pushback of, you can't tell us what to do. And it led to the only war that we've had on our own soil here, where we lost close to 700,000 people. That people would claim it was a government overreach.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that is we'll have, again, and I think it's connected. I just want to use the Civil War because it was probably the one that led to the most life loss of Americans in history. But there are people who there's only a few people who've actually said this to me, but they did actually say it. And that was, man, I don't think the Civil War was about slavery or whether slavery should be or not be. It's about whether the government could come in and control commerce and property and wealth and have control of a marketplace, which at that time, slavery was a part of marketplace and economy. It was an economy conversation, not a people conversation, right? And so for them, I only had a few people really come to me say that's what that was really about. And they say it with no sense of like remorse or as if that is better like, no, it wasn't as bad as slavery. We just wanted to make sure that the government couldn't tell us what to do. And we were willing to lose a ton of lives in the process, as though that's a more valiant thing to die for than the actual lives of the people who were enslaved.
Sure.
And so it says something to me that if you want to write down your priority list of things that you're like, hey, we're not going to take it.
Yeah.
You know, if we're going to get to that, the top thing on that list is government telling me what to do, not people. Like, if you're making a list, if you're going to make a list of, you know what's going to be the thing that I'm actually going to make sure that I put my foot down on, it's going to be about government control, not about humans' lives, you know, unless it's the abortion conversation, which is the exception to this rule. And I don't want to get too deeply into that, but it is the exception in the sense that we do want government to step in and do something there. But other than that space, and we really want the government to take their hands off. And we being those who would say, those who would value that particular allergy, I guess, to the government coming in and mandating or putting in some sort of restriction, you know. Sure. I just think that's fascinating. I think that's a fascinating realization that government control is at the top of the list.
Yeah, it's one of those things that, you know, it's worth looking and evaluating. I think that's part of what we try to think through. And even when we were kind of, again, prepping this conversation, just kind of the evaluation of that. It's an interesting point, right? Like, again, civil wars you're talking about, there seems to be this there seems to be a shame that comes when you say that people were fighting to keep slaves. But there seems to be no shame when you say that people are fighting to keep government from controlling the marketplace.
Yeah, it's like the one justifies the other. You're like, okay, so it's like, oh, cool. Then that makes sense that we lost a whole bunch of lives and would have potentially kept slaves, just to make the point that the government, it's like one justifies the other, which is a weird space.
Yeah. And you mentioned it, but I think there is a lot of correlation, and I think I felt it in what you're talking about, a correlation in this conversation we're having right now about vaccines, you know, beyond the idea of whether the coronavirus is real or not. I'm hoping that we've gotten past that conversation, although I know we haven't for some people. But the idea of the wishy-washiness of the conversation as we deal with it from a government sort of overreach deal, the use of language that is kind of used on both sides, if you will, for whatever they want it to be used for, right? Like, you know, you said, let's just take the abortion conversation. You know, my body is my choice, right? Well, that's usually used by the left side. My body is my choice. I should be able to, you know, practice abortion, those kind of things, where it's like, hey, no, on the right side, it's like, no, that's not that your body's not your choice, because you're actually talking about a child, another body inside of your body, right? And so what we need is the government to regulate and enforce laws that keep people from having abortions, because they actually affect the lives of other people, the weaker of our society, if you will. And then again, on the side that in that conversation, the right would say, hey, you need to trust the science. What the science says is that a baby has, you know, a heartbeat at this particular time, and the science says that this is a child, right? And so, you know, aborting that child is killing an actual person. Trust the science on that. Now you come to the conversation of the vaccines, and you see those things flip, right? So you have, my body is my choice. The right is saying that my body's my choice. I shouldn't have to wear a mask, and I shouldn't have to get a vaccine if I don't want to. I shouldn't, you know, the government shouldn't regulate that and shouldn't make me or mandate that, right? Whereas the right is like, nah, your body is not your choice. This is a collective conversation. This is a human conversation. This is about protecting the weaker in our society, those who have these underlying conditions, right? And the right and the left would say, hey, right people, you guys need to trust the science. I believe in science, right? And you guys don't. And to me, that's fascinating.
Right, like, right. It's just whatever works for you at that moment. Yeah. Yes. And I do think it's fascinating. I mean, because like, I'm with you. Like, I remember the first time I saw that, my body, my choice. And I was like, what?
What?
Like as a sign being held by someone who was probably conservative saying that they didn't want to take the vaccine. And I know, I think the problem with all of this is how, for some reason, however much is being said, the vaccine is supposed to be about you and other people, not just you.
Which is just life in general.
Which is life in general.
Yeah.
But in this case, it's like you get vaccinated so that you try to prevent spread. And I know that it's an imperfect precaution, right? It's not 100% effective thing. So, there's breakthrough, there's all these things that happen. But one would say, well, I say it's my body, it's my choice, because if I want to get sick, then if I want a chance to get sick, then who are you to make me not chance to get sick? And the government would come back, or the left, I guess, would come back and say, no, you're free to get sick all you want to. Go ahead. Mm-hmm. This is about your effect, the effect that you're having on other people, which is why it mirrors well with the abortion conversation, because someone else would say, hey, the reason we're trying to regulate that is because your choice is affecting the life of something else. If it was just you making a choice about your body, if you wanted to get a tattoo on your body, get it. If you want to smoke cigarettes, and okay, it's got these precautions. We got a label on it that tells you what it does to your body, but it doesn't hurt other people. You can't, so that's where the line is. And for some reason, I think the vaccination conversation is just not seen as I affect other people conversation. It's only seen as it's me and mine. And
which is interesting, because again, it's like that's all that. And this is why it becomes more of a political thing as opposed to even a medical thing, because you don't have to go far, you know what I mean, to see the effects of a worldwide pandemic on other people. I mean, we have doctors that you talk to every night. You're seeing news, or maybe you're reading stuff. You're seeing COVID cases. They're rising in certain places. I mean, we were really falling quite a bit at the beginning of the summer, and then throughout the summer, like it just was climbing out of control. I remember a good doctor friend of mine I was talking to, and I was like, man, what's going on? He's like, I just can't keep, like, the COVID cases are just mounting, like every week it's like tripling or quadrupling that's coming in here. And he's in the ER, right? Like he's seeing it firsthand, people coming in. And so so the effect is not just on ourselves. And even the effect on ourselves, it's really comical to me as I talk to people who maybe don't want to get the vaccine. I've had friends that get that get COVID and like literally disappear for a week, like to the point where you're like, what happened to so-and-so? Like, has anybody seen so-and-so? And then like they come back. This has happened at my gym. This has happened in my neighborhood. Like where you're like, I haven't seen so-and-so in like a week. And then you'll see them and they'll be like, very noticeably thinner, noticeably weaker. And then when you talk to them, like, man, what happened? And they're like, yeah, I got the COVID. I was like, oh, really? Like, yeah, man, I got knocked on my butt. I was out for a week. I couldn't eat. I couldn't go to work. I was tired. I had to stay isolated, blah, blah, blah. And then this is what they'll say. It wasn't that bad. And I'm just like, bro, growing up, I had sinus infections that led to pneumonia several times, and it never knocked me out for a whole week, but it knocked me out for enough days that I was like, man, if I could take something that would keep me from getting this pneumoniya again, I'd be all in, because it was horrible. And it was like 4 or 5 days. Right. Imagine something that takes you out for 7. And when you come back, like you're weaker. So there's a sense that I get it. And it's not that bad. And I remember
I guess they're like, it's not lethal. I'm alive.
That's it. And like it didn't.
And that's what they're
and that seems to be the bar. It's like, this thing is not that bad because the media is always the enemy on this. The media is making it look like it's, deadly, and like everybody who gets it dies. You know what I mean? But I didn't die. So it's not as bad as everybody's talking about because I didn't die. Yeah. And that's just I think that's problematic.
I do too. I mean, I would challenge the chat or anyone who's listening to this with the tell me. I'll bet if we were to ask anybody, if we were in a room, say raise your hand. Raise your hand if you know someone who's died of COVID, or know someone who knows someone who's died of COVID, and I think all of us raise our hands.
Yeah, it's like cancer these days. Like we all are affected by it. You know what I mean? Like we know someone, we had to watch that or hear the story, or hear somebody at church. I've been look, even here we are over a year and a half into this.
Year and a half.
I'm still amazed. I got on the phone with a friend 2 days ago, and he's a black guy. And I got on the phone. I said, "What's going on?" He said, "Oh man, I'm just trying to get through. I've had 2 funerals in this last week." I was like, "Funerals?" Like, "Yeah, I lost my uncle because of COVID, and I lost my cousin because of COVID." I'm like, I mean, like, it's still happening. There are still people who are being immediately affected by COVID, and even those who get vaccinated, who get it and go to the hospital again. And I just read a story the other day about a guy who went to the hospital, had COVID, luckily it had the COVID shot, because he would have died if not.
Yeah.
But it's still out there. And so
it's out there. And here's the deal, like we articulated the reason people don't want to do it, government control. And I would go so far to say most of that is coming from what I would say are white Americans. I would say, I mean,
from a government,
for government control. So if I sit down at lunch and I say, hey, if I open up the door, I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe we got to have vaccine mandates, which I've done just to open up, and that person is like, oh my gosh, their deal is going to be the government can't tell us what to do. Basically, if I do that with some of the black people I know, it's not about the government in the sense of overreach. It's about the government in a whole different kind of way. They don't trust the government, that either they haven't done everything they needed to do to make sure that the vaccine was safe, or that they're using the vaccine as in unsafe ways for people of color.
Yeah. And I would say, I think at the end of the day, it's probably both a bit. You could articulate they were both, as far as the perspectives, they both have a government overreach aspect to them, right? In the sense that the government is doing more than we want them to, but the mistrust, at least in the communities of color, has been, it's not that the government is overreaching on power, the government's overreaching on testing, you know what I mean, or they're utilizing human bodies as they've done in the past to test something, or to sequester something, or stop something.
Right.
I mean,
or experiment.
Yeah, exactly. The testing
this way or that way. Yeah.
I was in the barbershop the other day, and the black barbershop, because brother got to get his hair cut, in the right kind of way. You got to make sure that people know.
Gotta get it right.
Gotta get it right. But
y'all talk about boxing while you was in there?
It's football season, so we were talking about football. Like,
I was just joking.
It was football and crime shows. We didn't have Coming to America talking about boxing stuff. I know that you were trying to get me to go there, but I'm not doing it. But we were talking about, because you still come in and you got kind of the dividers between you, and you coming in with your mask, and each barber has the mask on. But there was a vaccine conversation going on in there, and the barbershop is not all black barbers, right? There are a couple others in there now, but the guys that have been there the longest were having a conversation, and one of the guys was like, I'm not getting it. And one of the other barbers was like, you're a fool. Why are you not getting this? He's like, they're just using it to sterilize us. And everybody, it was one of those moments where people in the barbershop went, oh, you know what I mean? You know what I mean?
Everybody in the room.
Yeah,
here we go.
And of course,
conspiracy brother has shown up.
Conspiracy brother showed up. But just in pure brand for conspiracy brother, he's not backing down. Like, he's going deeper. Like, he is actually like digging in his heels. He's not changed his mind, and he hadn't changed his mind, you know what I mean, in the deal. But
should we tell people what? Because just for a second, tell people what
conspiracy the explanatory comment.
Explanatory. Some people might catch conspiracy brother, but they're like, "What's that? What's conspiracy?" Let me tell you. So, conspiracy brother is a term used in the black community to describe the Black persons for whom everything is a conspiracy. Like they see conspiracy in everything, and everything is the man trying to keep us down to a ridiculous level. And even inside the Black community, we recognize that there are these conspiracy brothers in and among us, and we have labeled them, and will make a jest at their
expense
regularly. But the man may not be a full-on conspiracy brother, but that's a very conspiracy brother type of comment.
No, he is on brand with his conspiracy at this point. He is always the one that keeps everybody kind of like, are you serious right now? He has got all of that. But is it warranted? I don't, of course. I mean, historically, of course, we're living in suburbs at this time. And so I was like, come on, man, we live, like, I went and got my vaccine up at, in if anybody knows the area, I went and got it in Frisco. So I was like, they're not going to just throw any vaccine in this thing. And I went with my wife. So I just tried to ensure that I was going to get the white people's vaccine. Like whatever that one was, that's what I was getting. They ain't testing nothing up at Baylor Frisco. They're not doing it. Because Jerry Jones is over there with Cowboys.
Jerry Jones over there. He like that. We ain't having that kind of mess over here. Yeah. No, that's where we got ours too. But I say that, but I don't want to dismiss what he's saying. You're saying that he's not getting that out of thin air.
Yeah.
History has shown that the government has secretly tested on people of color for varying types of things, or decided to use
incidents.
Or decided to use
who ultimately created gynecological medicine would test on black females women with no anesthesia. So I mean, it just keeps going. So
so that's happened in the past, and at the time nobody knew. It took afterwards for someone to go back and be like, oh my gosh, they did this, so that's not purely out of thin air. That distrust, the point of this whole section is the distrust there is that Black people also are reticent about taking a vaccine for completely different reasons. And
that's not a political thing, because that doesn't actually make sense as far as the political divide seems to work on this idea of vaccines. That piece is inconsistent in some ways with that.
Yeah. So, and I think that both of these groups that have these concerns, we got to figure out a way to reconcile them, because if it's true that there's a disease that exists that we can carry and can be lethal to those who are weakest among us, I think it is irresponsible for us to act like that disease doesn't exist.
Yeah. But again, you're thinking about it in very collective terms.
Right.
Like you're thinking about it as the whole. And, I think this is why, to me, we've said it before, but America is like the ultimate adolescent. You know what I mean? Like they're just complete. And we are complete, like the 14, 15-year-old that you're trying to talk to. And I've got a 13-year-old in my house, so I'm right in the middle of all this, right? The 14, 15-year-old that is completely inconsistent. Like, I want my independence. Leave me alone. Stop being in my business. I want this. I want that. I want to be by myself. I want to do my thing on my own. I'm like, okay, cool. How about I don't give you any money and you go out and make it on your own? Actually, no, I really want some money from you. I just want to be independent, right? Like, it's that same thing, like the wishy-washy nature of that. And so when we get into these conversations, it just gets more frustrating as we go forward. But I think there's a way. I mean, I'm trying to figure out like the loss aspect. Like, what is the great, what is, can you even say greater loss? Like, what is the greater loss? We talked about individual versus collective, right?
Yeah. Well, the lesser of the two evils, or
that's probably,
rock in a hard place, Yeah.
Yeah. This is one of those moments that you find yourself like, what is the lesser of the two evils, or what's the rock in the hard place moment? And I found that, at least right now, there's folks who are starting to go, people who normally would be just about themselves are starting to go, man, I'm doing this decision because it's actually more beneficial to the society as a whole. You know what I mean? And I'm trying to think about it even very like spiritually. I'm trying to kind of maneuver and not just think about it biblically, although biblical is good. Like I'm looking at the scriptures as a whole, not just a scripture and using a scripture to make it work. I'm trying to think about the scripture as a whole and how it helps me understand theologically what's going on, understand the nature of God, understand like the mission of what God's trying to accomplish on this planet, and how my decision about how to invest or engage in this pandemic is affecting what maybe God is trying to do, or even what it's saying about God by my actions. Yeah. Right. That's what I'm trying to evaluate.
Right. I think what's tough about that is a lot of the Christian conversation right now in America is kind of tied to the nationalism, and the nationalism is tied to the government conversation, to the government overreach conversation. So a lot of people have made the leap to say that it is anti-Christian for the government to mandate vaccines. And therefore they would say, we as Christians have a duty to protect us all from the government mandate.
Yeah.
Not protect us all from the disease. Right. It's just a difference of what the actual enemy is. And of course that means that because government overreach is one step closer to government control over our lives, which is one step closer to socialism, which is one step closer to Marxism, which is the greatest evil there is, in the minds of these people. And so the Christian fight in this conversation is to keep the government at bay. And I, as a Christian, am not sure that is the Christian fight in this conversation. I don't, as a believer, hold the government as the premier enemy or ally of the Christian. I think the Christian exists, government, a government, if you will, not necessarily tied to these governmental entities, needing to respect those entities and participate as good citizens, but not reliant upon nor antagonistic entirely toward, varying sets of governments. So I don't have that, and that makes it hard for me to connect with people who really have that sense of connection between their idea of American governance and Christianity, and why those two are sort of intertwined.
Yeah, that sense of their idea of what's right and righteous is connected to how we do the things we do here, right? So it is looking at since we are, and again, very grateful for it, we are a democracy. The fact that we are a democracy and that our forefathers were quote unquote Christians means that our version of government is the most Christian version, as opposed to a socialism or a Marxism, communism, of those kinds of things. And so to uproot, or to, really not even uproot, but really to disagree with some of the ways in which the government has, maneuvered in this particular conversation. Well, not in this conversation. Actually, you're supposed to disagree with the government in this conversation if you're on the Christian side. But the government overreach, if nonetheless, now that I'm saying, even saying it out loud, like I'm finding the wishy-washiness of the conversation.
It feels right.
Because in this scenario, you don't want the government to participate because the government can't be trusted. But again, as we said earlier, if you're in the abortion conversation, the government can be trusted to make the right decision on this, and not the people.
The problem here is
so frustrating.
The problem is that the government isn't inevitable in this. The government is either going to allow or disallow. So it has power here, whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
In other words, so when Texas passes a law that says no one can mandate masks, what they're doing is giving the government power.
Yeah.
To tell businesses what they can and can't do.
Yeah, there's the Texas government giving power to the businesses to not listen to the federal government.
So the Texas government is saying we're going to mandate that you can't do something, and then another government is coming along and saying we're going to mandate that you must do something, and both of those things are exerts of power. Those are the things that the government doing something, right? And I don't know that the government allowing and disallowing is part of what governance is. And just because they're not putting down an imperative doesn't mean they're not acting with power. As a parent, if I see something my children are doing and I choose to allow it, I'm still exerting power in my allowance, you know. And then if I choose to say, hey, we're going to put this rule down that says you can't do that, I'm also exerting power. So the government, in my opinion, has power, and you're just going to have to get over that. The question, yeah, it's an inevitable piece. The question is, you know, what should the government do, and why are they able to exert certain levels of power and not exert certain levels of power? And in this particular conversation, you know, if we were to start from the place of pure idealism and say there's a legitimate disease there's a black plague that's killing all kinds of
people. Why you got to be racist, man? Why you all up in here just like could be a black plague? Why gotta be a black? See, that's conspiracy, brother. I just
conspiracy, brother. Oh, that's why they call it the black plague. Yeah.
I get it now. That's
it. No, but if there's a plague, if you will, out there, you know, yes, there's no reason why and even historically, American history shows that they've done that. Our forefathers did already execute some of those types of decisions in the past of putting in social procedures to protect the whole against the few, with regard to vaccine, or excuse me, with regard to disease. Yeah. So,
with regard to a lot of things, I mean, that's part of the.
But we can just stay in this disease space because. You know, it's right there. You know, you can see it. So I just think that the government, you know, this whole there's a distrust of government, and as long as distrust is there, whatever the government does or doesn't do, you don't like it.
Yeah,
you know,
unless it benefits you.
Unless it benefits you or your idea or your comfort level. In this case with masks, oh no, we're not talking about masks. We're talking about vaccines. So, but a lot of this is
sometimes
comfort
it's
level.
interchangeable with the conversation.
Yeah. A lot of this is comfort level. You know, so you know, you do what you can to make sure that things are safe, and you should hold the government accountable and make sure that they're dotting all I's and crossing all T's. But at some level, you're going to have to trust the government to either allow or to execute their power or refrain from using their power in one way or the other. But it has power whether you like it or not. And I just think for that to be the argument for many people just makes the whole conversation a non-starter. By the way, what's up, Malfunction? We do see you in the chat and see a question here. We're going to try to get to it in a minute.
Yeah. I was actually going to transition over into that, see what Malfunction was putting in there. Just Christianity, as it says in the chat here, Christianity is based on a collectivist worldview. So how is it that it's become so individualistic? Is it the collision with American individualism? You know, it's always an interesting thing that Christianity has aspects of both collectivism and individualism.
Right.
There is obviously, and we have done very well at putting this out here, particularly in evangelicals, of this, hey, if you were to die tonight, would you go to heaven? This very individualistic thought and thinking. You know, we've created big, you know, stadiums full of people to say, you've got to make this choice, you come down. And that's a very real decision that individuals need to make if they want to decide to follow Jesus. The next step of that is when they make the decision that they want to follow Jesus, that they are becoming a member now of a much bigger collective, where you've got now brothers and sisters that are not connected to you via blood, but they are connected to you via faith. As a member of the body of Christ. This is, you know, represented in Jesus' story when he's with the disciples and his mother and his brother come to visit, and they come and say, hey, your mom and your brother here. And he goes, who's my mother? Who's my brothers? Is it not these folks that I'm with right here? So it's just a reminder for us that, yeah, it's got an individualistic and a collectivist piece. But I think what's good in what you're talking about, Malfunction, is that Christianity, the model that we get from Jesus in Christianity is a kind of individual sacrifice that is for the whole, right? Jesus was not worried about himself, although, you know, we have him in Gethsemane. He's like, oh man, if you can do anything different, God, do it. But he decides, I am going to sacrifice my entire life I'm going to put myself through torture and beating so that the rest of the world has an opportunity to live. Right. So there is a big piece of sacrifice and selflessness that I think Christianity would teach that seems to circle around what's it going to be like for a much bigger group as opposed to just yourself. Right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I know the oft quoted John 17, it talks about unity. And I think we have an underappreciated understanding of what Jesus was praying for there. He wasn't just saying unity and that we all get along or that we all work together. Jesus said, make them like we are. And we understand that Jesus, God, Holy Spirit form a Trinity, that they are one. Mm-hmm. 3 in 1 is, is the way we've articulated. They're not 3 in unison. They're not 3 complementary. They're not 3 different pieces who really know how to work well together. They are a collective that is a singular, right? It's
unity and
many and one. That's the mystery of the Trinity. Wow, what that the way the math works there. And Jesus is praying that we as believers, he's praying for his disciples that they become like, he says that they become one as we are one. And you understand? So there is a collective there, the 3 in 1, the 3, and then there's the 1, and then there's the 1. And so even in the middle of that scripture, we see the challenge that is before us, for what that looks like. And I think it's very, you're right about the American individualism. I think America is individualist when selectively.
Selective. Everything's selective for us.
Yeah, because again, even with the race conversation, we've had systemic racism, and people are like, "Oh no, there's no such thing as systemic racism. It's just individual racism." The government sin isn't found in systems. People would say it's found in individuals, and all that works fine for them for the race conversation. But if we were to get a socialist leader and somehow become really, really close to socialism, then those same people would be fighting against a system called socialism that they would call sinful. And they would say socialism is a sinful system, a system that doesn't work well. And, at that point, it's no longer about the individual. It is about the group. So there does exist a potential that there's a system that could be bad and so forth and so on. And so the conversation just, it just, again, it's a dishonest conversation because it doesn't follow its own rules when it talks about multiple things. And so I would say even American individualism is more an economic, it's more advantageous to the economy of the modern day America, and therefore is what people want to protect, I think, than a true system of thinking about all the world, virtues and worldviews.
Yeah, and one of the things you were saying, I was thinking about isn't that idea of that you've got this, there's no such, there's not any systemic racism going on. There's not a system that is inherently got these things that are trying to ultimately make things worse for a particular group of people, right? Isn't that exactly what this vaccine conversation is sort of alluding to, right? That I'm not taking the vaccine because the government can't be trusted, because they are being there is something sinful in the government that is intentionally trying to put something over on a particular group of people, right? Like, isn't that the same?
I know, I've been talking,
but it's those very people that are having this conversation that there is no such thing as systemic racism that are basically now touting that there's systemic vaccinism going on with the government,
or even as we've mentioned in the past, the conspiracy around the vote and whether the election was stolen or not. All those things have to do with systemic
possibilities.
I don't know. I want to say sin. I don't want to say sin because it'll muddy the conversation. It doesn't mean exactly what I mean, but the problems are in the system, not in the individuals.
Right.
And so therefore we got to change this. We got to change the system. And so what happens? All the red states in America go and they change laws to counter this, or they adjust laws to counter the perceived
injustice of
injustice of the system of voting, or of the system even of mandates of vaccine mandate. There's laws being passed because we can't have a system that produces these disparate, these outcomes. So it's really interesting that we don't see it. I was telling my wife, I said, there's a part of me wants to write a book or an article, maybe, news flash coming to y'all very soon. Perhaps we'll see. Maybe I'll write something called White Woke. Right now, woke is a term that has to do with only pretty much racism and women and gay, right? And you're like, "Ooh, it's woke now," but the same toolbox that those people, the quote unquote woke crowd, is using, the white woke crowd uses when it comes to election, abortion, vaccines. It's the exact same playbook. They scream for justice. And that justice isn't confused. It isn't when someone says, "Hey, we want justice," meaning we don't want to be made to wear masks. No one's accusing them of Marxism and saying that they want redistributive justice and going through and redefining what justice means. No, everybody understands that what they're talking about is a right and experience that they. So, but it's interesting. So we have this white woke going on right now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same toolbox, the same playbook. We're still with the same group. That group is wanting to look at the laws, to change the laws that lead to injustice, just like the other quote unquote woke group is trying to look at the laws and change the law. And one of them's being called the pit of hell, Marxism, and the other one's just being validated as we just want to look at the laws to make sure that voting isn't that there isn't room for cheating in voting. What's the problem with that? And sure, okay. Why don't we look at laws for a whole bunch of things? When we start looking at the other things, then all of a sudden it's woke, and therefore critical race theory, or actually that would actually fit into the critical race theory window, but it's all these Marxism, socialism, all this other stuff. So it is very frustrating for me to watch someone tell me that when I say I want justice, I mean something else. But when you say you want justice, you mean the thing that I mean when I said it, only for your thing, and it's okay. Yeah. And it drives me just a little bit batty. But if you look at it, everybody's asking for justice and using the same toolbooks, the same tools.
Yes.
Voice, law, votes. That's the same tools everyone is using. And only one of them seems to think that they're legit.
Well, and that's why I think it's so important for us to really, as the body of Christ, to really kind of to really motivate ourselves correctly on this, because so much of this is tribal, right? It's a tribal conversation. Most of us, I will say, perhaps there are some of us out there who actually, in this conversation around the vaccine and those kinds of things, they're not actually either doing their own research or really taking a lot of time to sort of think through it sort of theologically, but rather they're kind of looking to their right and looking to their left, and they're going, what is my tribe doing? I have trusted my tribe before, so whatever my tribe is saying, I'm going to go with that. And there's a couple of reasons why. One is, as I just said, is your tribe has led you into the correct path before, so you just blindly trust it. Second is, that is your tribe, and who wants to not have a tribe? And so to disagree with the tribe would actually kind of get you kicked out. Yeah, and you may have said enough things in that tribe that you don't believe yourself to be welcomed in another tribe because of what you said. And so it's just easier to just go with that. And I also have to do a lot of work. I have to read, and I have to go into this Bible. I have to pray. I have to think about it, and I have to examine what am I seeing? And that's just a lot of work. So I think where we can be really successful as Christians is really starting to think through our motivations for why we are making those decisions, particularly around the vaccine and masks and all those kinds of things, particularly what is our motivation?
Yeah.
Right.
I wonder if it'd be helpful to write. I was sitting here thinking what would be if you pull out a piece of paper and write, here are all the reasons I won't form an opinion about vaccines. And you write, I won't form an opinion just because other people say so, or the right other people say so, or I won't form an opinion because there's like what you're saying, there's so many wrong reasons to form an opinion or wrong ways to, let me say not form, to arrive at your place. And just, mom and them told us, just because everybody's jumping off a cliff doesn't mean that you're going to jump off a cliff. Again, this is the adolescence of America right now.
Right.
So just because you're in a crowd that's chanting one thing, have you thought about what they're talking about? And that's for everybody.
Everybody. I'm
not talking just about those who are anti-vax or even those who are pro-vax. I'm just saying, do your homework, and try to figure out for yourself instead of just relying on other people, and try to do so with the grace and the love that God requires of us. Because especially when it comes to like vaccinations, like, anyway, there's a lot of grace to have, especially when you're dealing with something that's new. As someone who's led groups and organizations, you have to make decisions based on the data you have in front of you. And tomorrow you get different data, you get to make different decisions. And that doesn't mean that you flip-flopped. It just means that you learned, and you learned something new and you made an adjustment. And that's a part of what leadership is. And so if you don't give that grace to leaders, then they will look like flip-floppers all the time. You know what I mean? And there are flip-floppers, but when you're dealing with something that's new, so there's enough. My point in saying that is there's grace and there's love there. So that's all part of the investigating for yourself instead of just following the group.
Yeah. And I'm looking at the chat here, and I see malfunction came back again. And yeah, my body, my choice is a good example for reusing the tools. And I think I don't know if we talked about that very early on. So I don't know, maybe if you came in a little bit later, talking about the way those things are used. You said something when you're talking there, Antoine, I thought was actually a good principle too, is not only writing down, like, here are reasons why I'm not going to make the decision, but also like again, we're talking about vaccines, mandates, right? That kind of stuff in Jesus. But from a vaccine standpoint, like writing down, like, why am I getting it? Or why am I not getting it? Right. Like write those things down and kind of go, what is my motivation for doing this? And start to then go, which one of these has, how is fear playing a part in it? Right? Like where is fear? I feel like we're in a pandemic, so it's honest. I think it's just helpful to ask the question, where is fear playing a part? And remind ourselves as Christians, particularly, like that's not what God has given us, as a spirit of fear. Like the reason we don't have a spirit of fear is because we know the end. Like no matter what happens, right? Whether you die of COVID, right? Like the idea is I've got another world that I go to, right? Like that's part of I'm not fear of that. But then there's also like, if you were to get something to happen from the vaccine, again, not fear of that either, right? Like, so looking at fear, then also looking at this idea of individual versus collective, right? Like, which one of the decisions am I making from a motivation, are the decisions making from my motivation? Are they about me or my family, right? Because that's what I would call individual too. Are they about others, right? And then, and I would say, like, put those things up. I think if we're making decisions that is just about us, there is quite a bit of biblical content that would kind of actually push us in the opposite direction of that. Even looking at the very, you have 613 laws in the Old Testament that get broken down to 10 commandments that get broken down to 2 commandments of love God, love others, right? Love your neighbor as yourself, right? But then it gets broken down to really in both of those commandments, it's love that you're going for. And it's not love of self. It's always love of either God or love of others, right? So how does your decision put you in a situation where you can love God and love others well? And those who maybe aren't Christians, right? If you're a Christian, you're going, hey, there are other people who don't know Jesus that I want them to know Jesus. Now, who, if they don't have Jesus, it's a much different ending for them than you, right? And that's the way at least people understand it. And so you're trying to protect or your life in some way, whether you're getting a vaccine or not getting a vaccine. If you're trying to protect your life and you're not thinking about the life of others, particularly life of others who maybe don't know Jesus, that's another thing for you to kind of evaluate and think through. So that's just, for me, like, motivation is really a key deal. And which one of these things as well, last thing I'll say on this is also, which one of these choices that you're making, or as you're making these choices, are they meant to make God's name famous, as we say in my home, right? Like, when those who are not Christians look at the decision that you or we make as Christians, are they going, these people, I want to be with this God that these people serve, right? It's like, those are the kinds of things too. So, and you can kind of learn that from even, talking to those around you who maybe are not a part of the Christian tribe. How do we engage that? So those are just some things that come to mind as I'm thinking about how do you actually make a decision about this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, a point of observation just on fear, that you mentioned, fear is the piece of it, and somehow fear has gotten the rap of being this really, really super negative thing. Fear keeps us alive.
Sure.
In the sense that if I'm walking across the street and then I didn't see a car coming and that car honks, it creates fear for a second, and that fear motivates me and my legs to start running out of the street. A lack of fear. So there's a difference between, like, I think scripturally says God not giving us a spirit of fear, and this isn't necessarily to your comment, Marcus, as much as it is I see God's not giving us a spirit of fear a lot. Yeah. And of course that verse is about timidity more than like afraid of an enemy. Yeah. But as you say, you don't have to be afraid to speak up. You can be bold. So that's what he's talking about. No. But I think but even beyond that, fear and caution are just two separate. Fear, caution, it's two separate things. One can.
Could it be like the anxiety, like don't be anxious?
Well, the don't be anxious passage is probably more appropriate, for the conversations we're having. That spirit of fear conversation is just, like I said, often out of context, because he's just telling Timothy, don't be afraid to speak up because you're young. That's what he's going through there.
Right.
God's not giving you that fear of insecurity, but the fear here. So the fear is, but I want to draw a distinction between fear and caution, and people are intertwining them. Caution says, look both ways before you cross the street. That's pretty wise, and why do you do that? You do that because you're afraid that if you don't, you might step out there and get hit. And so someone would obviously come and say, hey man, don't live in fear, just cross the street. And then someone would look at that person and say, well, that's dumb. No one does that. Clearly there's potential threat, and we should be on the lookout for potential threat. That isn't living in fear, or if it is living in fear, it's living in a healthy form of fear, a form that should produce that sort of caution. It would be reckless by definition to live without fear. That's what reckless means, is to just do it, right? So I don't think that anyone would say, hey, the Bible says live recklessly, right? No one would say that way. And so I think when I say we, I'm not talking necessarily you and I, Marcus, as much as I'm saying Christians have to be careful about using this term. I'm not going to get a vaccine because I'm not going to live in fear. And to that I say, well, in that case, let's go to Six Flags and you don't put your arm bar down when you ride the roller coaster. You just keep it up. Of course, no one would do that because it's nonsensical to do that. So, when we say things like that, those who are not believers look at us and say, that doesn't make any practical sense, what you're saying. That just doesn't make sense. And it does water down the witness and practical nature of what it means to be a believer in our world when we don't take normal precautions that would be taken, and we do so quoting the scripture that tells us that we shouldn't take them, because if we do, we're subject to fear or what have you. Mm-hmm. I think that's a mismanagement of what the Bible is saying, and causes damage to the church and its ability to be a wise voice in communities, rather than promoting some sort of spiritual maturity. So I think we should just be real careful with this whole concept of fear. Fear caution is one thing, and caution is good. And we should do that. That's a part of wisdom, living wise. But there's a whole different thing. So I want to like speak into that. It's one of the things that one of the many things, right? Drives me nuts a little bit when we hear it.
Last thing, just because I think it's an important part of the conversation too, is this judgment piece, right?
Yeah.
Again, we've said it before. I think most people are not making decisions intending themselves to be, say, a villain, right? In the story, nobody thinks of themselves as a villain in their own story, and so there's this way in which I think we, as a Christian, we have to really model a sense of where you've got people who are, again, you've got the cancel culture, or people who are like, I am shutting down all relationships with people who don't adhere to my understandings around, masks, vaccines, all those things. And I think we need to make sure from a Christian standpoint that we recognize that it's not like, we've got to understand that there are people who are going to have different thoughts about this, different points of anxiety. And our job is not to force them or shame them into making whatever decisions, but is to come around them and to love them and to help them in the midst of it. Maybe they just need help with information. Maybe they just need help with, trusting. Again, the friend doctor I was talking to, he has, lots of people coming to his ER, and everybody who comes into his ER, he asks a question. He's like, are you vaccinated? And they're like, yes or no. If they say no, he says, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you 10 minutes of my undivided attention to answer any sort of question that you have about the vaccine. Just want you to make sure that you are informed. I'm not judging you because I'm your doctor, right? Like, I'm a doctor. That's not my point, but I do want to make sure that you're getting the information that you need to be able to make the decision well. And that's been, fruitful in certain ways for him based on his definition of fruitful. But for us, it's just the idea again of like, we should not turn this into something that should break relationship and break unity, or the opportunity for unity amongst the body of Christ, for sure. So it's just a piece for us to be reminded of.
Yeah, man, it's a lost art. Yeah, maybe I say a lost art. Maybe did we ever have the art? I don't know, but it's a lost art for the church community to understand that the community is on different, that people in the community are at different levels of conviction in their spiritual life about things. And we've gotten to a place where we're like, hey, either you have the level of conviction that I have, or you're not a Christian, a lot of times. And we'd have lost the ability to tolerate each other's growth, and the fact that people are in, like, one step of the growth instead of further. And when we do that, it creates division, because what it does is it takes people when they are young and in one portion of their spiritual life, and others who are further along in that portion of their spiritual life, judging them. It makes them enemies to each other, argue with each other about the things that they're both convicted by, that they think God wants from them. Mm-hmm. And again, I said it before, and I think an explosion of Romans 14 in context, the proper context of it, really helps us deal with that, especially since Paul is writing specifically to these divisions and this division of thought. And while they're arguing with each other about what God wanted, he's like, listen, you got to figure out a way to get the essentials right and tolerate each other's sanctification journeys, basically, which cause different decisions at different points. So I think it's well said, what you said. We got to figure that out. We got to figure that out now with the vaccine conversation, about everything. Yeah, I think, because right now it's either like you believe what we believe or you're out.
Yeah.
I know, and I'm just going to call it out. I know a lot of friends of mine who are in the Reformed community. It just feels like that. If I talk to somebody who's Reformed, if I agree with 9 out of 10 things, I'm not a Christian. Mm-hmm. I got to agree with 10 out of 10. And if I don't, I'm a false prophet, or I got to be 100%. If I'm not, then I'm out. So we have to be careful about that kind of stuff.
No, that's good. Yeah. And good conversation here. I mean, it's a lot. We went vaccines, government overreach, racial applications, tribal issues, the wishy-washiness of the conversation, not this one, but period. There's just a lot around it. And so hopefully it's created an opportunity for you who are listening out there to hear, I hope, a balanced approach. I mean, I mentioned that I got the vaccine, so you obviously know my cards on the table is that I'm getting it. I've got it. Exactly. And I've gotten vaccines for other things, as I mentioned at the beginning, going to Rwanda, right? Like there's some things that just, if you want to maneuver through, some of I've gotten the vaccine for it. So, but we hope that it's been a
me
balanced
too. And I hate
conversation.
needles. Like I
Yeah, you
really
do.
hate needles. Like I
Your
have a
story is
phobia.
like the
I have a
best.
phobia of needles. Like I
Can I just,
I
yeah,
don't take voluntary shots
no,
as a
no.
life principle.
Just, and look, just to get your business out, like when Antoine's getting the vaccine, he couldn't even know when it was happening. It was his Lisa had to just be like, hey, good morning. Today's the day I've booked you for your for your vaccine,
because I will squirm out of it if I had the best, if I could. I'm like, I don't really want, and not philosophical, just pure phobia of needles. Yeah, but I got it too. So there it is. Twice. They had to give me 2 of them.
That's right. You had to go back for that second one. That's right. I don't have a problem with needles. I mean, I've got multiple tattoos of needles. Yes. I can't say nothing about needles.
I don't mess around. I don't mess around at all.
Hey, but good comment. Yeah, this is Color Commentary, colorful conversations by colorful people about Christianity, culture, and race. You've been sitting in here live. We appreciate everybody who's been watching, coming in. Thank you for putting your thoughts in the chat. Those of you who are listening via podcast, if you want to be a part of Color Commentary Live, make sure you jump in. I didn't pull it up the next one that's coming up here in October. I'll pull it up while you.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the date is either.
That's all right. No, you give us a little plug for the collective, and I'll look it
up. Yeah. Well, if you're in the podcast, just go to YouTube and subscribe to the Color Commentary channel. That's the first thing you could do that, and then you'll see it there, and you can set the reminder once we create the live event. But also, listen, guys, we've got Threaded's got an amazing campaign that we're doing. We want to see as many people as possible grow in these conversations and be able to navigate these conversations in healthy and Christ-like ways. And so one of the ways we're doing that is we're offering something called The Collective, which is a membership service that creates an opportunity for you to connect with others who are along this journey and to create consistent connection with us as well, us being Threaded. What we are doing through The Collective is providing monthly webinars, monthly educational resources that are new and timely many times to what we're dealing with, as well as live Q&A sessions for people who are part of that community to come and to break through and ask questions about what's going on. Really, the live Q&As, I was thinking about this yesterday, Marcus. The live Q&As are going to be really good because we know that something else is going to happen at some point. Mm-hmm. And what the live Q&A does is just allows us to take on the community's thoughts and questions real time, and so whatever's going on, there's already a time in the month where we're going to talk about it. There's room to talk about it. So, so it creates an opportunity for you guys to. And then there's a community aspect where you can go to an online community forum with other people who are doing and going through the same thing. And you can talk and be encouraged and encourage others through that community. And so all of that costs about $10 a month to be part of The Collective. It allows us to continue to make the resources available and bring people in to do what they need to do. Or you can get it for a year and get it for $100, which gives you 2 months for free. And it's really a great opportunity. Over 30 hours of content is already there, and we're adding about an hour or two per month at this point. So fantastic stuff. If you want to go and be a part of that community, let me encourage you, go to wearethreaded.org/collective and get signed up for that, and you'll get to experience all of those things: community, education, encouragement, inspiration. You'll be courageous and confident to have these conversations going forward in whatever way you need.
That's right. That's right. Well, hey, we thank you guys for being in. The next Color Commentary Live is actually the 22nd of October. We're going to get it a week before we get into the Halloween time, whatever people may think about that. We're going to get in. Maybe we'll do one on Halloween. We'll see what we're going to do on that.
Maybe we'll hit it.
Get in there on that. But we thank you for being in here in Color Commentary. You know, there are colorful, lots of different lenses out there, lenses through which people of different cultures and ethnicities look through so that they can see the world. And as we see the world, each one of them get to experience God in kind of unique ways because of their lens. And so the more we put our lenses together, the more colorful our lens is, the more of God we get to see. And so we encourage you as you go out into the world with that in mind, that you stay colored.